Well, hello there, and welcome to another episode of Critical Weight Theory. Today, we're going to actually look at a classic rap album, something that I don't do that often, although I've done it a few times in the past. Now, I do have to say, rap or hip hop or whatever is not my main genre of music, so I'm not exactly an expert, but I did some research into this album and I was aware of its existence, but I just had never listened to it before. So, how does it hold up? Well, it's actually pretty solid. I enjoyed the album. And this podcast, I sometimes, look at albums that change the culture, you know, of a given genre and the artists, who change the game in a certain way. So I'm Wade, and today we're looking at the monumental piece of hip hop history known as Ice Cube's America's Most Wanted, which was an explosive debut solo album. I did talk about Ice Cube in a previous episode. I did an entire episode on him and, went over some of the basic facts of his career. So I'm not going to do that so much here. We're mostly going to look at this album. So just picture it. The year is 1990. Ice Cube, fresh off his departure from NWA, is stepping out on his own. Why did he leave? Well, it all boiled down to money, and more specifically, royalty disputes with NWA's manager, Jerry Heller. But Cube didn't let that stop him. He packed his bags and headed east, straight to New York City. Now, this wasn't just a change of scenery. In New York, Cube linked up with the Bomb Squad, the legendary production team behind Public Enemy's revolutionary sound. And Public Enemy really is one of those groups that you could say did sort of revolutionize a genre. They really, in some ways, made it more of a, I don't know, more of an art form. Like the the sample oriented stuff that they had. That they deliberately made statements with the samples that they used. Like they would have political clips of sound bites playing in their songs, and really a lot of Public Enemy songs and their albums come off like their concept albums, or like concept songs, I suppose you might say. They don't just like do a generic type of approach to songwriting. So I think that influence is actually visible on this album, and not just because Chuck D actually appears on some tracks. I think there must have been a little bit of Public Enemy influence on the overall sound and the feel of this album, because Public Enemy, they have kind of a sort of aggressive yet still almost old school sensibility to their sound. Like you can still kind of tell that they're rooted in sort of old school rap, yet they had sort of a modern sensibility to them. Like it was both militant and sort of traditional in a way. And I'm sure some people out there might think, "What are you talking about?" But some of you might get what I'm saying. But anyway, this partnership created a bold, aggressive, and chaotic energy, which was a sort of a fusion of West Coast gangster rap swagger with the dense and sample heavy madness of the East Coast Public Enemy sort of approach. It was a cross regional collaboration that in some ways shook the hip hop landscape of the time. I don't really know how influential this album is overall, but I'm sure it's been at least somewhat influential. And beyond, the beats, what made America's Most Wanted so groundbreaking is simply the themes, the concepts that are on the album. The album didn't pull any punches. It was raw, political, and straight up unapologetic. And it had some heavy hitting tracks. The themes, you had racism and police brutality, tracks like Endangered Species, Tales from the Dark Side. They call out police violence and racial profiling. Ice Cube wasn't afraid to put America's darkest realities front and center. He's not just talking about stories from the streets, he's actually exposing systemic injustice, and he does so in a rather plain manner. He sort of makes it abundantly clear what he's talking about most of the time. Now, granted, you're going to have a few cultural references where if you're not really, into the hip hop culture, you might not get every single reference, but I think in a lot of cases you're going to understand what he's talking about. And, speaking of systemic oppression, Once Upon a Time in the Projects paints a gritty picture of ghetto life, highlighting the struggles of inner city survival. In a way that even somebody like me, when I was younger, I might have been able to understand it because it's just made so plain, you know. And then there's the biting commentary on media and government corruption. The album's title itself, America's Most Wanted, with the three K's instead of a C. It's a bold statement pointing directly at how black men were and still are criminalized in American society. And if you look at the standout tracks, there's the blank you loved hate, which is a word I'm not supposed to say, but anyway, that track is pure fire, as the kids say. It's a rebellion anthem with Cube calling out societal hypocrisy and institutional racism with razor sharp lyrics. Who's the Mac is a good song. Here, Ice Cube takes a satirical lens to different hustler archetypes in society. It's clever, smooth, and undeniably catchy. There's Endangered Species featuring Chuck D from Public Enemy. As I noted, this track doubles down on the message, against police brutality, making it one of the most powerful collaborations on the album. And I think the impact of the album was massive, perhaps. America's Most Wanted was more than just an album, it was a cultural moment of sorts. And it established Ice Cube as a solo artist. It went gold within weeks and eventually hit platinum status. Critics praised it for its raw honesty, political sharpness, and groundbreaking production. It's an album that sounds good. It's not like you hear it and there's like, oh, it's outdated or whatever. No, it sounds fresh even now. And beyond the numbers, this album solidified Ice Cube's place as one of hip hop's most powerful voices. It laid the foundation for his later classics like Death Certificate and The Predator, which I have to say are albums I haven't listened to all the way through, much like I didn't listen to this one until fairly recently. But I do plan to eventually get around to hearing those. And more than 30 years later, America's Most Wanted still resonates, I think, if you were to put this on, in a crowd of people who can appreciate this type of music, I think they could get into it pretty easily. It's a reminder of hip hop's roots in resistance and storytelling, a raw, unfiltered reflection of societal struggle and personal triumph. So, that's it for today's episode of uh, music review stuff. If you enjoyed this little review, go ahead and hit the subscribe button, and you can leave us a review of your own. By us, I mean me. you know. Um, but conceptually, I suppose there are other people who are in some ways related to this podcast. I've had guests and whatnot, and I do plan on having guests and maybe even a co host for at least some of my shows in the future. So, again, my name's Wade, and until next time, keep the beat alive.